All right, let's go ahead and watch the beginning. We'll probably. Oh, I was going to say we'll watch the opening statements and not interrupt, but I'm assuming we're going to have to interrupt to explain like philosophical terms and stuff like that, or share thoughts. So we'll just interrupt whenever we thought. Anytime you guys want to stop it, you'll stop.
Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. Tonight we are asking the question, or really answering the question in debate form: do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? I've got
Look at Cameron with this grin on his face. Ha ha! Now my plan to cause maximum division at the worst possible time is coming to fruition.
Dr. Trent Doherty, Dr. Christopher Tomaszewski. I've got Jay Dyer and Father Ananias with us tonight. And the format for tonight is mainly open
so I know two of these guys.
Yeah, me too.
Actually, I only knew of the four debaters. I only knew Jay like by sight. I knew Trent Doherty from his writings. Not familiar with the other two guys, but this is Catholics on the left here and Orthodox on the right. That's right.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, this guy has
easy to remember. Looking at it, just look at a map of Europe, and the Catholics are on the right side of Europe. If you're looking at a map of Europe, and the Eastern Orthodox are on the right side as well. So Catholics are on the west. If you're looking at a map, the Orthodox are on the east. Easy to remember.
Or you could do it like this: the Orthodox are the ones who are on the right side of history, on the right side of things. Yeah.
dialogue. But we do have some opening statements at the very beginning of the show, so there's going to be 10 minutes for each side. I should mention, oops, we've just lost. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Got to have him because he's got the coolest beard, and that, I have to say, is a very, very Orthodox beard.
Ananias, his video dropped out for a second. We're back. So each side is going to have 10 minutes. Dr. Trent Doherty, Dr. Christopher, they are on the affirmative side. So they are Catholic. They are answering this question in the affirmative. So they've got each 5 minutes for an opening presentation. Then we're going to turn it over to Jay and Father Ananias. They've each got 5 minutes for their side. And then we're just going to go to open dialogue. And then toward the end of the show, if we have time, we'll do some Q&A with you guys. So with that said, we're going to jump right in.
What'd you say?
He forgot to say that they are on the right side.
Oh, yeah.
Last thing I'll mention before we get into the debate is we are going to, I've got bios for each individual debater, presenter here. I've got that linked in the description of the video if you want to learn more about
Quit talking so much and get to the debate, Cameron.
Today. So let's go ahead and now turn it over to Dr. Trent Doherty for his 5-minute opening statement.
This is the guy that challenged Jay to a fight, right?
Yeah.
IP, you were here. I was pointing out, like, I've read stuff by Trent Doherty in the past, and so awesome stuff, brilliant stuff. So then I see the first video clip I ever see of him. He's like,
I know.
Why don't you got any boxing skills, bro? Huh? How about some MMA skills, bro? Why don't you come and face me in the gym, bro? And I'm like, wait a minute. It's hilarious. Oh boy,
I hate everything.
Like, dude, you don't understand. Like, I had zero clue what he looks like or anything. I just remember reading his stuff. But that would be like, you know, like imagine reading Planaga all your life, and you finally see Planaga in a video, and he's like, why don't you come say that to my face so I can knock your teeth down your throat, bro? And you'd be like, what? Wait, what the heck? What? Anyway, it's funny stuff.
All right.
By the way, this, I have to say, this is all probably part of Cameron's plan. Behind the scenes, he was like, look, you should challenge Jay to a fight. That'll really, really, really help spread this around.
Oh, wait. This is his presentation?
What?
Of course they do, duh.
Yeah, that's how philosophers argue. We go, duh. Of course they do, duh. Anyway.
That's kind of weird.
Great.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the brilliant Trent Doherty.
So in the fall of 1990, as a young evangelical, I went to Liberty University.
You just have to toss that in.
To be the research assistant.
Back when I was a stupid evangelical, now I'm a Catholic.
For Dr. Norman L. Geisler. He has since passed away, God rest his soul, but he was one of my main first mentors. And while there at the Liberty Center for Research and Scholarship, I worked on a number of books with him. One of which was Thomas Aquinas, an Evangelical Appraisal, subtitled, Should Old Aquinas Be Forgot? Another one.
Wait, this is decades ago. How old is he?
50.
He's in his 40s, 50s, something around there.
I have no idea. I'm just guessing.
I read. Hang on. Let's go.
Was called Answering Islam, that was co-authored with a student of his that was a former Muslim. And
I read Answering Islam in prison. So that was 90s. So if he's talking about he was doing stuff back then, that's a long time ago.
for the research for that book, we had to read the Quran cover to cover and take notes on 3x5 note cards. Yes, this is the fall of 1990, and so I had the opportunity that time to read the Quran cover to cover, which I had not really anticipated, and I have read it not cover to cover since then, but I've read it. I've returned to it occasionally, and I've even had studies on it with some good friends of mine, one of the groomsmen that was at my wedding, and.
Worst book ever written. But, dude, you understand you've only got 5 minutes, right? Anyway.
What's clear from the Quran is it's obvious.
I don't mean Answering Islam. Answering Islam is one of the all-time best books about Christian apologetics dealing with Islam. The Quran, however, worst book ever.
That Muhammad encountered Christian and Jewish preaching in Arabia. I think everybody's pretty much agreed that he probably didn't have an Old Testament or New Testament scriptures. I don't know, doesn't matter. But he clearly encountered their preaching and teaching. And the Quran explicitly states that Jewish and Christian scriptures are revealed by God, albeit incomplete, and that Muhammad came to complete that narrative. And it talks.
I don't think it's relevant. I'm not sure I would say it like that. The Quran, the position of the Quran is basically Allah sends different prophets to different parts of the world, to different groups who speak different languages, and the last people to receive the revelation were the Arabs. And so once Muhammad was sent to the Arabs, now everyone had their prophet, and everyone is supposed to judge by the scriptures revealed in their language. You're still supposed to believe in all the scriptures and all the prophets. So you believe in the scriptures of the other group from the other land and so on, if they're sent by Allah. But what you're supposed to judge by is what's revealed to your group in your language. So I guess you could technically say the previous scriptures are incomplete because Allah still had revelation to give to the Arabs, but it's not like the Quran is saying that the Torah and the Injil are deficient and they're lacking something. Not the position of the Quran.
About Adam and Noah and Abraham and Joseph and many other biblical individuals. And in the course of doing this, the Quran mistakenly attributes many mistakes to Jews and Christians, and Jewish Christians in both in the details and in the interpretation of their own scriptures. So, for example, the Quran says that Noah had a son that refused to get on the ark. And it says that Aaron didn't make the golden calf. And the biggest and most central disagreement is that it says that Jesus didn't die on the cross. He just appeared to die on the cross. And in these places and others, what I want to note two things. First, Islam disagrees with the biblical narrative. Okay. Secondly, Islam is wrong. It's mistaken. The Quran gets it wrong. There are these disagreements, these contradictions between what Islam teaches and what Christianity teaches, what the Bible, what the Quran says and what the Bible says. And in that disagreement, it is my firm belief that the Quran and Islam are mistaken and that Christianity and the Bible have the correct view there. But notice two things, and we'll jump into the slides. And I've actually forgotten what these slides say. So when I see these slides, it'll be...
You had to send Cameron slides for 5 minutes. You go through 3 minutes, and you don't remember your slides. I'm just messing around. I don't know.
Reminding me of what they say. But notice two things about this story. By every extant semantic theory of reference is fixed by causation and context. All right. That's how reference gets fixed, by causation and context.
Guys, there are, everyone who's watching, there are times when philosophers are using terms that are difficult to understand and difficult to grasp, and you have to spend a lot of time and use lots of examples to understand them. There are other times when it sounds like they're talking about something difficult, but they're actually not. So, like reference fixing, that sounds like some complicated thing. Just as far as what you need to know for purposes of this discussion, you have words that you speak, and somehow those words refer to other things. Like if I say, this is a cup, I have a word cup. How does the word cup or mug or something like that come to refer to this? Basically at some point in history, someone decides to call this a cup or a mug, and then this gets passed on to other people and so on. And now the word refers to the cup. So that's about all you would need to know about the concept there.
And in the origin of the Quran, the origin of the foundation of Islam, there was clearly back and forth interaction between Muhammad and his early followers and whoever it was that wrote down the Quran, and Jews and Christians that were preaching the gospel, preaching from the Old and New Testaments. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that leads to the first argument for the affirmative, that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. The semantic argument. Premise 1. If the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, then its terms pick up their references from that biblical narrative. This is a straightforward consequence out of every reasonable semantic theory. Premise 2. The Quran did originate out of this context of furthering the biblical narrative. That's just a historical fact. QED. So the consequent of premise 1 follows.
So from premise 1 and premise 2, he claims that the conclusion Christians and Muslims worship the same God follows.
Well, they reference the same God.
I reject.
I'd like to see the rest of the argument. Yeah.
That's argument 1. That was the argument. That's
the whole. What's the conclusion I'm trying to see?
The conclusion is Christians and Muslims worship the same God. I think that's what he means by QED.
Yeah, I don't think that follows from the premises.
And plus, I'm not sure it does either.
Isn't it just that it references the same God? I think that's just his conclusion here.
Well, but he's saying with QED, he's saying, therefore, I've proven the point, which the claim is that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. I wouldn't say. I mean, you're not even referring to what was the actual topic on the screen? Was it do Christians and Muslims worship the same God?
Yeah.
Let's see.
I mean, I just don't think it. I don't think it gets to that conclusion.
Oh yeah, no, it was on the screen. Topic is, do Christians and Muslims worship the same God? I don't think you get there from this, and I would also reject premise 1. Ooh.
I mean, like, just think of this in like a roadmap issue. Like, so you could say like, my directions pick up on let's say you have like directions to get to the supermarket, and I say, well, I'm going to give you even better directions to get to the supermarket, and then you end up at like the garbage dump. That does, just because my intent was to further to help get you to the supermarket by giving you better directions, that doesn't mean I actually got you there. So I don't think this actually gets to the conclusion from what he's presented there.
David, why do you disagree with the premise 1?
I think it's incomplete and misleading. Let's look at this. If the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, so if Muhammad is claiming if Muhammad is interacting, so this is what he was just talking about, that the context of the Quran is that Muhammad is in some sort of interaction with Jews and Christians about their claims and their scriptures and so on. And so this is relevant as far as like, if the Quran is talking about Jesus, okay, if you're responding to a Jewish claim about Jesus or a Christian belief about Jesus or something like that, if you're talking about Jesus, what's the context? Oh, you're talking to Jews and Christians? Okay, you're talking about the same Jesus. Even if you say things that disagree with Christians, you're talking about Jesus. And so what he says here, if the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, so assuming that Muhammad is saying, hey, I'm adding revelation to your biblical narrative as I'm having these discussions with Jews and Christians, watch the rest there, then the terms are using, like Allah or something like that, Allah, Jesus, so on, then its terms pick up their references from the biblical narrative. Meaning, if Muhammad's having interactions with Jews and Christians, then the terms he's using are picking up what they're referring to from Jews and Christians. That's partly true, but terms like Allah were around before Muhammad even existed. And they had a pagan context. That's why I said this would be incomplete. So guys, I mean, think what he's saying here. Hey, if there's a context where Muhammad's interacting with Christians, then the meanings of the terms he's using, the references are being taken from that source. Well, that's not the only context. Muhammad is in a context where he's interacting with Jews and Christians. He's also in a context where he's interacting with pagans and polytheists and so on. And that's what he's raised in. My point here is you can't say, oh, when Muhammad's talking about God, he has to be talking about the same God that Jews and Christians are talking about because he's having discussions with them. He's also having discussions with pagans about Allah. So does that mean he picks up the meaning of the term from pagans? Right? In other words, there's multiple contexts here. You can't say, hey, the references are picked up from this context when there are multiple contexts, and Muhammad clearly is picking up things from the pagan context.
I was going to say I got a better analogy. If you let me nerd out here for a second, are you ready for this, David? Think of
it's just like in Star Trek. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm not going to go there. I'm obviously going to Lord of the Rings. Okay, so think of the Lord of the Rings, a great story, beautiful story. What comes along with Amazon Prime? The Rings of Power. That's like the Quran. It tries to go back and fill in the gaps, but it gets a lot of things wrong. It has the 3 elven rings created before the One Ring. It has Isildur and Celebrimbor living in the same time period. It has the attack of Aragion happening before the Dark Lord reveals himself and before he makes the One Ring. There's all these problems with it. It's claiming to be the same story, but it clearly is not. It's a messed up, nonsensical monstrosity that we all should just reject. And so, like, they'll claim this is like a continuation of Tolkien's work. It isn't. And all the fans know it's not. We all reject it. And we go, this is not Tolkien. This is not Tolkien's world. This is a monstrosity. So... yeah, that's what I think of. That when he brings this kind of stuff up, I'm thinking of the Quran. Like, it claims to be a continuation of the Jewish scriptures and the Christian scriptures, but it isn't. It gets so much wrong. There, nerd rant done.
Okay, so let me give everyone an example following that one without all the nerd stuff. So once if you were to reword premise 1 so that it actually gets things, it gives you the full explanation. You'd have something like Allah is part of the polytheistic pantheon of Arabia. They worship multiple gods and goddesses. Allah is one of their gods. Allah has, daughters, Allat, Alusa, and Manat, and so on. And Muhammad comes along and he says, hey, this one of the gods is the only god. All the others are fake or they're something else. But they're not the creator God. That's Allah. And then Muhammad is in interaction with Jews and Christians saying, hey, this God is the same as your God. But you look at the descriptions, and a lot of them sound a lot more like a pagan polytheistic god than they do like the God of the Bible. So clearly Muhammad, he takes one of the gods of the pagan pantheon and then says, hey, I'm going to strip away the polytheistic stuff and then just say, this is your God. And the conclusion that we're supposed to draw is, therefore, we're talking about the same God, because it's when you talk about picking up their references from the biblical narrative, it's kind of like adding some additional reference from the biblical narrative to an already pre-existing pagan concept of a deity. And so the conclusion is, therefore, you're talking about the same God. Why? Because Muhammad comes along and he says, hey, this is one of our pagan gods. I'm getting rid of the other gods. This is the one God. And since this is the one God, this is the one God that you guys are talking about as well. And this God is the same God you guys worship. And Trent says that since he's picking up that reference from the biblical narrative, therefore, they're talking about the same God, because keep in mind the reference is like something like God of the Bible or God of Abraham, and he's saying yes, this is the same God, and so on. So guys, just think about this for a second, because there's some serious problem with this. There's some serious problem. But did you want to say something?
No, I'm gonna explain this in very simple terms once you're done.
Okay. I just wanted to explain some serious problems with this reasoning here. So one, it's incomplete. If you wanted a full picture, it's an already pagan concept that Muhammad then, in his interactions with Jews and Christians says, hey, this is your God. If you think that is legitimate, not in the sense of getting to the truth or that we are therefore, all getting to God or all paths lead to God and something, just if you think that's enough to show that Christians and Muslims are worshiping the same God, think about if the scenario had been different. So again, Allah has 3 daughters, Alat, Alusa, and Manat. I think Manat is the goddess of destiny. So suppose instead of saying Allah is the one God, suppose Muhammad said that Manat is the one true God. The goddess of destiny is the one true God. So suppose instead of saying Allah, Muhammad had said Manat is the one true goddess. There's only one goddess, and there's only one deity, the goddess Manat, who's the goddess of destiny, and this is the goddess of Abraham and the goddess of the Bible. This is what Jews and Christians are worshiping. I do not see anything in his argument that would not lead you to conclude the exact same thing, namely that Jews and Christians would be worshiping the same God as the people who worship Manat, the goddess of destiny, right? The same thing would follow. You take a pagan concept and say to the Christians, hey, this is your God, and therefore we say we are all serving this. I mean, we're all worshiping the same God. Does that actually follow? In other words, I think Trent would have to say yes. I think he would have to say, well, yes, if he had this totally pagan goddess, Manat, the daughter of Allah, and he walks in there and says, hey, Jews and Christians, this is your God, and this is the one we're going to worship, then you'd all be worshiping the same God. He would just be wrong about certain things. Muslims would be wrong in their beliefs about Manat, but they still would be worshiping the same God. They'd be referring to the same God and worshiping the same God. And that's just weird, because guess what? You wouldn't even need to divorce Manat from the polytheistic framework. You wouldn't have to do that. The same reasoning would follow. In other words, if Muhammad had remained a complete polytheist, and he walks around, he's talking to Jews and Christians, and he says, hey, we've got a goddess Manat. That's the God of the Bible. That's the God of Abraham. You'd say, well, they're wrong about the polytheistic stuff, and they're wrong about the details of Manat, and they're wrong about the characteristics of Manat and so on. But since they're claiming this is your God, Jews and Christians, then you all worship the same God. Even if it was a polytheist talking about a female goddess of destiny, you'd have to say you're worshiping the same God. The Muslims are getting a lot of details wrong when they're talking about their God. Guys, does that seem weird if you were a polytheist and you had a goddess of destiny and you said, that's the God of the Bible, therefore that would mean that you're all worshiping the same God? That just sounds really, really, really weird to me. And it follows from his argument. In other words, if that had happened like that, he would be using the same argument right now to claim Christians and Muslims worship the same God, who, according to Islam, is Manat. You could use the exact same argument. So, again, look at the premise. If the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, that would happen even if Muhammad was a complete polytheist, and even if he was proclaiming Manat as the God of Abraham. It then picks up the reference from the biblical narrative. In other words, he says, "Hey, this Manat, you know what? I've concluded that this is a continuation of the biblical narrative." Then you conclude the Quran well, premise 2, I'm not disputing. The Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative. And he's saying the conclusion follows from that. What's that mean? It means that if Islam were claiming Manat, the goddess of destiny, one of our many goddesses and gods, is the God of the Bible, and you'd have to say, following this reasoning, that we all worship the same God. Even if I didn't know what was wrong with that argument, I would think you got a serious problem claiming if your argument leads to that conclusion, which is obviously seriously problematic. Even if I didn't know what the problem was, I would say there's got to be a problem there, because that is absolutely insane and absurd.
Now, here's the thing. I'm just going to make this very simple. We have demonstrated this again and again and again, David and I and others as well. So Trent's point here is, if the Quran originated in the context of furthering the Bible, pay attention, originated in the context of furthering the Bible. Let's analyze that. David just explained it. Did the Quran actually originate in the context of furthering the biblical narrative? No, it didn't. No, it didn't. The best I could give it is that it starts out from a completely polytheistic pagan starting point, and then starts through syncretism taking on biblical things and incorporating them, adopting them, or appropriating them, stealing them, and then claiming that they are actually part of the very same God, of the very same religion. That's the best. That's the most I can give. That's the most charitable that we can be. That is literally what happened. Islam did not start within the context of the biblical narrative. Islam started out within polytheistic Arab paganism, and then took over Abrahamic stuff and claimed it for itself. Let's continue. Then its terms pick up their references from the biblical narrative. So we already demonstrated just now. We can happily expand on that the first part of the premise 1 is not true. Therefore, the second part completely collapses. Premise 2, the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative. We just explained that it actually didn't. So very, very, very simple. The entire argument here is built on the absolutely false claim that the Quran, which means the revelations of Muhammad, the prophethood of Muhammad, originate within the context of furthering the biblical narrative. The very clear as day fact, is that Muhammad's revelations, so-called revelations, did not originate in the context of furthering the biblical narrative. This goal was only added later on. Therefore, the entire argument here has collapsed.
I mean, someone was bringing up Acts 17 in the chat, and I want to address that really fast, because well, wasn't Paul doing the same thing in Athens when he went to the how do you say that word? Areopagus or something like that. Yeah, that's it. And he says, well, weren't they doing the same thing? He was trying to make connections. Well, the difference is that he says, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. To the unknown God. This is different because they're saying we made an altar to a God we know nothing about. Meanwhile, the Muslims say we do know things about God, and we can say things about God, and they're wrong things. So they're saying there's a known God, and it's the same as the biblical God. No, these are contradictory things. That's my main issue with this whole argument.
And false premise. So guys, look at the conditional. If the Quran originated in the context of furthering the biblical narrative, then this is definitely where it picks up its references from. The Quran originated in multiple contexts, and as AP was pointing out, we know that the references that are being picked up actually came before the interactions with Jews, before, definitely existed before Muhammad is claiming to add revelation to the biblical narrative. So you can say that the biblical narrative caused modifications of the terms Muhammad was using. So the idea here is, guys, it would be like saying, The book of, let's say, the book of, let's say the Gospels. The Gospels were written during a period of Rome, the Roman Empire having conquered the nation of Israel. Therefore, it picks up the meanings of its terms from the Roman Empire, because that's the context. Well, that's not the only context, guys. That's not the only context. You have other contexts. Namely, you have an entire religious context that came long before the Romans came and invaded and so on. Why are you saying you would get it from the Romans and not from the religious context that was already there? So, yeah, well, I would reject premise one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And therefore, you haven't proven your conclusion until you clean up. That's the cool thing about arguments, guys. You can have a problematic premise and then just modify it and correct it and so on. So I'd be interested in seeing what the argument is if you corrected the premise. But guys, there is an underlying important idea that Trent is appealing to here. And the underlying important idea is if Muhammad's having discussions with Jews and Christians and they're talking about God, and hey, you think God is like this? Hey, but here, God this. Remember when God did that? It sounds like they're talking about the same God, even if they're getting some details, even if they have some different details and so on. How are they even communicating and having this discussion if they're not at least attempting to talk about the same God? So that's the underlying important point. The argument doesn't follow until he fixes his
That is the very important thing. That is where things can actually get complicated because, so I was thinking about this earlier like this. So we are here. We, let's say above us, there is the one true God, right? So we can say we worship, our one true God. I could point at a different group to my right that also worships one creator God, but they have nothing to do with us, nor do they claim to worship the same God. They worship a different God. So they're over there worshiping their own creator God who does not exist. So ours is the God that we truly worship. And then over there to our left, to my left, we have Muslims. The Muslims are different from those other people on the right. The Muslims do claim that they also worship the God that we worship. Right? They also claim that they worship the God of Abraham, the God who sent these revelations, the God who sent these prophets, and so on. So they see what we worship. So they say, hey, whatever you guys worship, we are actually worshiping that too, but we are doing it the right way. You're doing it the wrong way. So this is where it gets complicated. When it comes to these other guys, we can say, no, they don't worship the same God. They worship a different God. When it comes to the Muslims do refer to our God and do claim to worship our God. But the thing is, they didn't start out from a starting point of actually being within a framework of worshiping that same God. They started out from a completely foreign, pagan, polytheistic place, and then slowly adopted our narrative of worshiping God. And now they claim to be worshiping that same God with their own corrupted, completely messed up, and false understanding of our God. So when we now say those guys don't worship the same God that we worship, we can't really equally say that Muslims also don't worship the same God that we worship. They at least try to worship the very same God, but they don't actually worship. And I guess this is where the complication occurs, like on what both sides mean when they say Muslims do or don't worship the same God. But I guess we can all establish one thing, which is that Muslims at least claim to worship the God that we worship, right? We can all agree to that. Mm-hmm. But we would argue that they don't actually worship that God.
Well, I mean, some told me they don't because they like, you worship a man, we worship the real God. So like I've heard Muslims say, no, we don't worship the same God.
Yeah, and that's part of my reasoning. If you ask me, do we worship the same God, then I would just think about a situation like, okay, if I ask a Muslim, do you worship the triune God, who's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? You're going to say no, right? So why am I going to say, no, you are worshiping that God. You're just wrong about some of the details, but you are worshiping that God. Hey, look at this stupidity. Ahmed says, Injil is gone because fools, man changed it and lost its originality. So you have translation, not original book. Look at this. One, you have translation. Sorry, Mod Ahmed. We have the Torah and the Gospel in Hebrew and Greek, which is what they're written in. Just like you have the Quran in Arabic, and we have translations, just as you have translations. So if we don't just have translations, but if you think translations are a problem, you've got translations. I have probably 15 different translations of the Quran. Injil is gone. That's weird because Allah says that Jews and Christians are still reading the Torah and the Gospel. It's Surah 7, 157. Allah says it's not gone. You contradict Allah. You says man changed it. Allah says no one can change his words. That's Surah 6, verse 115, Surah 18, verse 27.
Well, man is more powerful than Allah. So.
And lost its originality, lost it, and yet Allah commands us to judge by it. He commands Christians to judge by the gospel. And Muhammad in Jamiat Tirmidhi says that Christians have the gospel. So this is what's just amazing. It's you don't just contradict our religion, you contradict your own, and it never seems to bother you guys. Very, very, very weird religion, man.
I got a question. If Ahmed is referring to the Greek and going to try to claim Jesus spoke Aramaic, why was Jesus given the Injil, which is a transliterated of a Greek word for gospel, Evangelion? So if he's claiming that the Greek is a translation, well, why does the Arabic of the Quran say he was given a Greek document that has a Greek title? I don't get it.
Yeah, Ahmed, what is the gospel? What is the Injil? Please explain to us what the Injil is and why it is called Injil. Go ahead, man. Come on.
Yeah, and what's amazing is some of these guys they're so slow and so brainwashed by dawah, they don't even understand when you're making the point. It'd be like, for anyone who's watching, it'd be like if someone came out and said, "Ha ha, you stupid people! Friedrich Nietzsche never spoke German. That's dumb. How can you believe that he spoke German? Let me quote you his book, Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft." And you'd be like, that's a German title. That's a German name for a book. Why would he be using a German name for a book if he didn't speak German? What is wrong with you? That's what you guys are saying. You're saying that Jesus had a book called the Injil, which is the Arabic transliteration of the Greek word Evangelion. And so Jesus brought a book with a Greek title, but didn't speak Greek. Oh, that's a corruption. What a religion, man. What a religion.
Why don't you use the real word, the gay science? Why don't you call it that?
Okay, so this is argument 1, ladies and gentlemen, which suggests that there is an argument 2, argument 3. Let's see what happens.
1 minute
But he's got 1 minute, so.
left. Okay, next slide. Disagreement.
Argument 2. I'm familiar with this as well, the disagreement argument. Cameron's been posting the disagreement argument. Premise 1, Islam and Christianity disagree only if they are referring to the same entities, predicating properties of the same subject. Premise 2, Islam and Christianity disagree, so the conclusion follows Christians and Muslims worship the same God. We'll let him break it down, but I'm going to have a problem with this as well.
Argument. Premise 1. We disagree only if we are talking about the same thing. If we're talking about two different things, we don't disagree. But we do disagree. Therefore, we must be talking about the
Can you disagree about whether you're talking about the same thing?
same thing. Next slide. So this is actually the biggest slide. Like, so what if we're talking about the same God? Absolutely nothing follows from that. Absolutely nothing follows from that, because the distinctive between Christianity and Islam isn't there are differences with respect to the doctrine of God, but it's Jesus Christ and his saving power and his acts, his virgin birth, sinless life, atoning death, powerful resurrection. That's what sets Christianity apart from Islam. And so there's just no negative consequences that follow. Absolutely zero soteriological consequences
Look, he's got burn on there.
follow from the affirmative to the question that
And that's
Jews
time.
and Christians and Muslims worship the same God.
I mean, this was so
I'm
bad.
not
There you go.
Why would he?
I'm not.
This was so bad. Well, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he sit down and make a proper argument if he wants to have this conversation? This was just.
He did. He said,
I mean, it's one thing
burn
to-
and fight me, bro.
It's one thing to disagree on this topic, but I expected him to actually sit down and give a proper argument, man.
I'm not even sure I fully get the second argument. I feel like I'm just I'm trying
I-
really hard to steel man. I just don't know if I can.
I get the second argument. Let me see if I can get to it.
I get it too.
Right there. Yeah. It's what I was saying earlier about Jesus, right? If I'm saying Jesus died on the cross, and you say no, Jesus didn't die on the cross, then we're disagreeing. We have to be disagreeing about. We have to be talking about the same Jesus if we're disagreeing, because if you said, hey, there's some guy who didn't die on the cross, I would say, so what? There's most people haven't died on the cross. Most people in history didn't die on the cross. What's your point? If we're actually disagreeing and I'm saying, yes, he did, and you're saying, no, he didn't, you're talking about the same guy and you're saying different things about him. So the claim is, even if Christians and Muslims are saying different things about God and we're disagreeing and we're saying, no, he's our father, and you're saying, no, he's a father to no one. If we're having this disagreement, then we're talking about the same God, and we're just, someone's wrong. But if you were just saying, if you were talking about something completely different, it would be like, you're not, I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't care. You're talking about something else. I don't care what you're talking about. You're not talking about what I'm talking about. So that's kind of the idea. If Christians and Muslims are disagreeing about God, Jesus, and so on, then we have to be talking about the same things. Because if we were talking about different things, we wouldn't be disagreeing.
Paul.
Yeah, I don't know if that follows. I mean, like, and I've thought about this with regards to the Gnostic Jesus. Like, if you read about Jesus in like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Judas, like I have always kind of thought like that's not the Jesus of the Bible. That is some weird philosopher who's an aeon from another dimension. It's because they explicitly reject the God of the Old Testament in these various Gnostic groups. And I always thought like this is nothing like Jesus. This is a completely different Jesus. And so I don't know if that necessarily follows, and I've never really intuitively thought that that would work in this case. I can make another analogy. Like if I'm talking about Thor, yeah, you know Thor, he's mentioned, he's one of the gods of Norse mythology, and you go, oh yeah, he's from Asgard. I'm like, yeah, he's from Asgard. Yeah, he's where he fought his sister Hela with Hulk, and then they escaped on the big ship, and then they flew away and fought Thanos. I want to be like, oh, hold on. I'm not talking about the Marvel character. I'm talking about the deity from Norse mythology, and you're gonna Norse mythology, and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, it's just the same reference. I'm like, okay, but like, there's so much differences now. You could say that one character is based on the other. Sure, it's based on it.
The one
I
is
sure
based.
did.
One's based.
Thor is based. You can clip that now.
You see him in the movies. He's so based.
But I mean, like, it's they made up a whole new character, just sort of just borrowing elements from the older Thor, but it's completely different. It's like someone is like painting, like going back to the Mona Lisa. It's like someone is looking at the Mona Lisa, painting their own version. It's not the Mona Lisa what they're painting. They're trying to mimic it.
Yes, it is.
When it comes to Islam, they're doing a horrible job.
In your faith. Hang on. Watch this. Prepare to be humiliated.
Uh-oh. I feel like there's just a lot of leaps there. I just can't get on board with this argument.
Yeah. Oh, there are some leaps. Hey, look. Now, look, I even said Mona Lisa on it. Therefore, we have to be talking about the same Mona Lisa.
The very funny aspect about this is also that, so he says Islam and Christianity disagree only if they are referring to the same entity. So his whole point here, his whole conclusion is that they are referring to the same entity. Well, I can agree that they are referring to the same entity when they say that we worship that God. But do they actually worship that God?
Yeah, let me give an example along those lines. So, matter of fact, let's use completely different examples here. If I said this little pagan goat here is Cameron Bertuzzi, and you say, no, that's not Cameron Bertuzzi. I watched Cameron Bertuzzi. I just saw his live stream. We just saw him earlier in this debate. This is not Cameron Bertuzzi. Say, hey, well, if we're disagreeing, then we're obviously talking about the Cameron Bertuzzi, the same Cameron Bertuzzi. There's a sense, going along with what AP, there's a sense in which, okay, we are talking about the same Cameron Bertuzzi because we're talking about Cameron Bertuzzi. But if I said, this is Cameron Bertuzzi, And when I'm talking to him, I'm talking to the same Cameron Bertuzzi who talked to you that you talk to when you're on his show. Guys, do you see something wrong with that? Like, we're disagreeing about whether this is Cameron Bertuzzi. And if we're disagreeing, therefore we're talking about the same Cameron Bertuzzi. And if we're talking about the same Cameron Bertuzzi, then when I'm talking to this Cameron, suppose we worshiped it or something like that, that if I were to worship this Cameron Bertuzzi, I'd be worshiping the same Cameron Bertuzzi that you would worship if you were on a show and you decided to worship him. Does that follow? I think Trent would have to grant it. I think we'd have to grant it, given his argument from reference and so on in disagreement. I think he would have to grant that and say, yeah. And you're wrong about the details of Cameron Bertuzzi. Whereas I'd be looking at this going, if I'm saying this is Cameron Bertuzzi and I'm talking to Cameron Bertuzzi right now, and you're actually talking to Cameron Bertuzzi, like, because you're in the room with him right now, and you say, well, because of, reference and disagreement and so on, therefore I'm talking to the same Cameron Bertuzzi right now. I would say you obviously have a problem with your argument, even if someone can't spot. Even if someone can't, by the way, guys, that is one way to evaluate arguments. You can learn fallacies and things like that and be able to spot problems and reasoning. But one way to do it is just to kind of change the ingredients and run the exact same argument with different ingredients and see if it leads to conclusions that are obviously ridiculous. And I would regard it as obviously ridiculous to say that if I call this Cameron Bertuzzi, I'm talking to the same Cameron Bertuzzi that you talk to if you're on his show. But following Trent's reasoning, I think you'd have to say, no, that is the same one. I'm just really, really wrong about him.